Welcome to Warblog. I'm just going to do a quick video here. I'm going to look at the latest thing I've done, Eastern Hudaydah. This is still ongoing, but by the time I finished it, it's probably a bit out of date. But essentially, we've got the Saudi alliance down here forming this sort of front, coming around there and trying to capture Hudaydah. So I'm just going to jump straight into play. I'm not going to play for too long. Oh look, what's that? That looks interesting. It hasn't got a mouse over, has it? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, let's use this one. So essentially, what we've got is a front line. Like this. So what they're actually what they're doing is because this is a bit of a dead end for them. It's pretty tough to get through. They have they are pushing this way in an attempt to surround Hudaydah and cut it off. Now they've already cut it off along this road here, which went through 10 kilo from sort of whatever is over in this part, which is sort of where they're getting some supplies from. But one of the things that is important about Hudaydah is that they're actually getting supplies through the port, and those supplies were then actually going more this way and supplying that. So this is one of the important things about Hudaydah. So essentially, when you're playing this, it's really probably more for just observation and note. And if you were to play this, you'd have to sit down, and I've said this multiple times before, but you'd have to sit down and actually spend a lot of time thinking and actually come up with some sort of plans and just not, play like an idiot, sort of chucking everything at everything. Now, you don't have to follow that sort of plan of going through there, but you might want to. You might want to do one thing at a time, and when you've got a big game like this, I quite often advocate the 1 or 2 initiatives a turn. So you might say, okay, well, we've got that line there. Let's get the so you might want to say we want to take this lot here. That could be your initiative goal. Now, there's only 1, 2, so it shouldn't actually be that difficult. But then you have to sort of say, well, what are we going to do elsewhere? And that would be for you to decide. Now, it's quite unbalanced in some extent, because I think it'd be quite easy to push in these directions. But the thing I think you've got to bear in mind is that they have objectives, but these are irregulars. So these can actually attack, 2 of these can attack one of these at 3-to-1 odds, which isn't bad. And so the Saudi coalition probably don't want to be taking too many losses. So you've got to sort of think not just on what you can do, but on what position you'll be in at the end of that. For example, you might be more interested in just consolidating these units here. But going back to what I said, so you can sort of say, well, okay, well, what can we do? For example, we can actually already move into there, because there isn't anything there. And also I think it's worth bearing in mind where all the units are. So, for example, we've got a big stack there. There's too much in there. We've got some artillery, but it's all motorized. But we've got this stack over here, which has got 2 Saudi armored units and some mechanized. You know, so we've got quite a big reserve there. We've got some reserves here. We've got quite a lot coming in through here, which could go either way. We've got a lot down here, and we've got quite a lot down here. Now, what I have done in this game, which is a bit unusual, I haven't put anything on as reinforcements. I've just sort of plonked them on. It just took me as on a whim. So now down here, you might sort of think, well, what can we do? Well, it's a little tighter. I don't think there are any easy options. I mean, this is, you know, that's a stack of 6 in lighter, so it's going to be doubled to 12 in dug in, which I think is going to be tripled, so that'll be 36. And then, I can't remember what dug in does now. Entrenched does. Be either 24 or 36. So that's quite a big stack. We're not going to be able to take that. Could possibly think about moving towards the airport. These are all objectives, but I sort of inclined to really just sort of try and do something over here. But the thing is, I don't want to just do it. I want to think about what can be done. Now, I think that we can possibly do what I said there, but I don't know. We can't. Yeah, of course we can. We can move that into there. See, that's what I'm thinking as a starter. See, that just seems like a really attractive area to be hitting at this moment. See, I think what you'd need to do is to sort of say, you know, you really sit down and actually, almost with a bit of paper, say things like, you know, this particular section here, you know, A, we've got this strip along here. B, we've got maybe the tip here. C, we've got this vulnerable section here. D, we've got this maybe better defended section there. E, we've got this sort of open area here. F, we've got this sort of, and then finally we've got this sort of corridor here. G, and then what we've got there is reserves and the port. So what I'm saying is we can sort of say, well, these are these separate, disparate areas. What are we going to do to contend this? What are we going to do to contend that? Now, I sort of think that we can punch that out. Maybe push these 2 units away so that this section C would be at the end of what we do, for example, would be orientated more like that. I think we could sort of leave that, but possibly pushing it back slightly. I think here would be just looking to contain that. Here, I'm pretty sure that we can push that back to almost there, making quite good ground. Here, I think we'd be looking to maybe leave that as a stalemate here, leaving that as a stalemate and leaving that as a stalemate. So it's pushing this block back, or dealing with C, dealing with D, containing A, maybe pushing B back, not because we're trying to have an offensive, just because we're trying. There's just not enough there to sort of say, well, we're worried about this section, but there's so little, we can at least push it back to give us some breathing space over on this side. Whereas this is more an offensive action, this is more a defensive offense, if there could be such a thing. So I don't know what I want to deal with first. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on C and D. So it means really, at the end, somehow trying to essentially get a foothold in these urban areas and pushing back essentially, I think, to try and take these hexes, which would give us basically that line there. So basically trying to capture that line, and that's what I'm going to focus on in this little section as just a turn. I think the most challenging one is going to be this, because we're not even close to it. And I'm going to sort of take a jump here and just push him there. So what I've got in there, see, this is where it gets tricky, because they're quite well defended in there. Well, I've got some artillery somewhere, so let's use that first. And we've got some air power. Well, that was rubbish. Well, I think that's a significant hex, so I'm going to try again with the air power. These are just low numbers all the way. Well, after all that, he's at 0.8 and he's at 1.2. Well, he's going to go 4. Doubled for light urban, 8. Either 16 or 24, because they're entrenched. I think it's going to be doubled entrenchment, so it's going to be 16. So 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 30, 36 with a surround of plus 30%. It's going to give us about 40. We should get a 2 or 3 to 1 against that. Three to 1, and there were as expected, factoring in the and so my whole plan has come to nothing because I can't get through that. So I cannot get that nice line now. Well, I've taken that bit back, really. And all of that is now used. It's interesting. What I'm going to do is try and push this one back. I should be able to at least push that back. They got the dice roll of 12. They push them back. Into there. Brilliant. Brilliant. But that does allow me to do what I wanted to do. Okay, well, he moved into there. Okay. Now that is pretty much, I haven't done this bit here. So that's going to be another toughie. But we might be able to get that corner there. But I see an opportunity here. And DR. He should be okay in there. So that's pretty much that, really. So, considering my initial plan, I do like splitting things up like that. You can visualize it so much easier. We wanted to be here. Wait, this is what we wanted. That was what we wanted, that line there. And what did we achieve? we achieved this. So we managed to take 2 hexes that were sort of on our list of things to take. This one here and this one here. I'm just having a look at that. That was interesting. And I think mainly because this hex here, we don't even have that. I have to redraw my line. I will redraw it. And that's what we wanted. That. And what we actually got was even worse. So we took that hex and that hex, but we didn't get that. And I think a lot would depend on that, because these units would all, a lot of them are mobile. They would have been able to sort of move through there and push onto that. If we'd taken that, we would at least have had this one. And that would have given us possibly spare movement to have taken that, and then to have focused on other things. These units, have these moved? No, they haven't. So we do have a little bit of scope. These ones have, but these ones haven't moved yet. The thing is, it's pretty pointless. I don't want to attack that because it's too heavily entrenched. I can go for one of these, but I don't want to move in, because if I do, that will leave that open with a notice we had to get my artillery. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I think the focus that I want to emphasize, or the point I want to emphasize in this, is the use of those areas. I mean, I just define them just almost arbitrarily, but they allow a lot more sense to be made of things. Defining areas, these 2 areas. For example, this one, we can still even almost see that long area there as a sort of section. Now that this is moved over slightly as a sort of separate thing, and we could sort of say, well, how could we actually sort of, do better on that? Now we've got a central reserve still here, which could in theory sort of come maybe here. It could have maybe joined in that fight there. I don't think the odds were that bad. 3-1 I think they were. We could have possibly maybe moved these up into there to maybe push it up to a 4-1, but at 3-1 we were probably unlucky with that. But thinking about things in that sort of scope, I think changes things slightly. Because otherwise games feel like you're just moving everything you can to achieve whatever you can, whereas if you think, I don't want to use the word operationally, but if you think operationally, you think, okay, this is operation 1, or this is activity 1, this is what we're looking to achieve from this sort of particular impulse, etc., etc. That's sort of the correct way to approach wargaming, I think. I say that because every time I play, I always play these games slightly against it, because I'm busy, I've got other things I need to be doing, so I'm just slotting it in, sliding it in. I mean, I haven't been sitting here thinking about that, I've just been thinking, I've got to get a video at some point, and I keep deferring it because I've got things I've got to do. And I just think, I'll just do it. So I've just done it. So I didn't really sort of plan this. It's not as though I've been planning this for a week and got this really great idea. But basically, the point I'm trying to make is, when I do see a lot of videos that other people do, some of them are entertaining, but they always seem to just sort of start the game up and then just start moving things. And they never really explain what they're trying to do, or it just seems as though I used to play a game called Settlers, and this was like years ago. This is like 1995. You know, that's sort of like 23 years ago. And in there, you just move whatever's nearest. You're always, you know, it's just like you're constantly just moving things without much thought. I mean, I play Civilization, and I think that's to some extent the same sort of thing. Those are more sort of popcorny type games where that's you're allowed to do that. But I think in these sorts of games, it really helps if you sort of, you know, if you are able to sort of define your strategy and sort of, you know, consider things in that sort of way. And I think the annotation tool really takes the war game to another dimension. I keep saying this, but I've not seen anyone else use an annotation tool to sort of like define planning beforehand. And you know, just doing that, it puts things into a different perspective and a dynamic. I know a lot of people, you know, will focus on things like supply lines and things, you know, and we don't have that. So, you know, this is not, you know, a perfect thing. Just one thing I have just noticed, actually, I just want to comment on before I sort of stop, because I'm not going to go on for much longer. It's basically it's nothing special, but I just want to say, when it is the other player's turn, because I haven't finished this turn yet even, this is going to be isolated. So they're going to have to move back. Now, we don't have anything to take that hex. That would be nice. And it might have even been nice to sort of have really concentrated on surrounding that maybe first. So if we were to play again, it might be better off to focus on, instead of trying to take it on the first turn, to surround it and then take it at leisure. Because the next turn they're going to have to move there, because if they don't, this unit will move there. They'll just surround it, and then when they get their DR, it will be eliminated. It's not a big unit, but I think that's something that they're going to have to do. Because they're irregulars, they can probably move through zones of control and probably get quite, I think, 2 hexes through the desert, or maybe 3, so they'll probably be able to get there. So they'll be able to sort of push into there and create that line there and reinforce it. So it's going to be interesting, section C and section D, to see how that sort of pans out. I think down here it's just going to get a lot more reinforced and heavier going, but this is just going to swamp things. I think, you know, obviously this is an ongoing situation, and I think one of the things that maybe is worth bearing in mind is that, you know, that we're still playing that sort of New World war, in the sense that people don't want to be taking casualties. You know, in theory, if you look at the numbers, they can just overwhelm them, but they don't, because they don't want to take 1 or 2 casualties. I was looking at the when I've got the book here, the Iran-Iraq War, Lessons of Modern War, and I'm looking at the I've started the game. I'll just have a quick look at it. It's the Fajr offensive, and nothing in particular to note really about it, other than the fact that the fighting, basically this goes on from about the 7th of February, the 7th of February to the 10th of February. The total casualties on both sides ranged anywhere from 10,000 to 15,000, and as many as half of the casualties were killed, with Iran losing about 3 times as many men as Iraq. So that's sort of 5,000 men killed, 10 to 15,000 casualties. You know, that was in a time when they could get away with that. I mean, that's just a stupendous amount of men to be losing, you know, regardless. But it's almost comparable to the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, I'm not sure how many people died at Waterloo or any of these other big battles, but in 1983, that was par for the course for the Iran-Iraq War. I always like to compare that to how the Vietnam War was being waged, because they weren't losing as many men on that sort of scale. I've already talked a number of times about some of the disasters of the Korean War, sending Green units straight to the front and losing 900 men out of a 1,000-man unit on the first day. Probably one of the last catastrophes of that sort of scale. I'm not saying it was, but what I'm trying to get to here is, when you start to look at that, 10 to 15,000 casualties, and then you start to sort of consider the mentality of the Saudi coalition, that they can't afford to lose any. It's all news propaganda. They can't afford to sort of saying, oh, they had a massive assault through here, and they won, but they gained a square mile of territory, but they lost 2,000 men. They can't do that. So even though they've got numerical superiority, I think I'm not sort of trying to define this term as anything derogatory, but in our new world war order, so to speak, the new way of waging war, acceptable casualties is a major part of it, I think, in the perception of perceptible casualties. This is why America and major allies, including the Russians, use proxies. They don't want to be, getting involved with the sort of the attrition of bad press, or associated with losing men. I mean, there's probably quite a lot of many people dying. I mean, we know that there's a lot of starvation and disease and illness anyway. But that's, from the combat, there's quite a few people dying. There's even quite a few Saudi people dying. I mean, especially so when you look at Afghanistan, there's quite a lot of casualties going, there, and Nigeria. But the point I'm trying to get to here is, I think any sort of action has to be sort of based on the limiting casualties because of that. It might sound odd, but I think before, commanders and military operations were probably less focused on, the actual loss of life from their own side as they were victory. They were more obsessed or more concerned with victory. And I just think that, this is a paradigm shift. I'm not sort of saying that they're more moral or there's any sort of dramatic shift one way or another for any particular reason or purpose. And I put it all down to, our modern age with digital communications and instant awareness of what's happening. I mean, if the Iranians were as aware of what was happening at the front line as they could have been if they'd had the internet, and I know even now they probably don't have full internet, in the sense that it's sort of, a lot of it is restricted, and they probably wouldn't necessarily be told things even now, but in theory, in the light that they could be, and maybe they would expect to have that sort of instant news one way or another, even if it was controlled by the state, that they would, the government would not be wanting them to know that 10,000 to 15,000 casualties were created in this sort of 3-day battle that took 1 square kilometre of desert or across the border. It's the same with the Ethiopian-Eritrean War, in the sense that there were a lot of casualties. There's a lot of action going on. None of the people of Ethiopia were being told what was happening. The first that they knew of the advancing Eritreans was when one of their major cities was under artillery strikes, and the artillery rounds were coming in, and the Eritreans were actually visible, from the city, and small arms fire could be heard. But up until that point, they were being told, it's Orwellian, that the war was going well and there were victories here and victories there, but, no one was actually being told. I'm not sure I'm making a lot of sense, but what I'm trying to say is if you're looking at this sort of scenario, you might sort of think, well, why don't they just send everything, through here? And I think the reason these things are going so slowly is because they're trying to pick and choose their battles, not because they suddenly great warriors and leaders, but they've really got to make sure that they don't lose anything. And this is one of the reasons why I think the Houthis are sort of able to put up a more stoic defense, because they're not just being steamrolled by the massive Saudi coalition, which they could do, but because it would be too expensive. There would be, much larger losses, and I think they're trying to wage war. I think all around, everything needs to be more surgical. Everything is sort of surgically approached, in the sense that they're probably, doing exactly what I did there and saying, okay, well, we're going to take this. And even an exchange result would probably result in bad publicity and would be, perceived as a failure. I mean, this is why I like to sort of take it one step at a time like that, because we can see where we are now. We can see where we were, the move before. We haven't even done everything else. But you can then start to sort of so what will this look like on the, the headlines? Will that be just sort of Saudi coalition fail to take the Salah housing complex? Brave stoic Houthis, defend their territory to the end, or something, whatever. I mean, they could have, it's on that 3-1 odds, they could have lost, and it could have been something different. But something like that, you can then start to sort of make mountains out of molehills, so to speak. Reading more into less. And I'm not sure what I've said in this video already, but in comparison to these people that just sort of get a scenario and just start moving everything about without any plans of action or thinking, you don't get any of that. There's no sort of that reflection on actually what's happening, the implications, and to some extent the sort of the minutiae of role play as to what would be going on as a result of that failed attack on the Salah housing complex, and the slower than planned progress along here, the failure to sort of take that line, etc., etc. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I think it's far more interesting than I thought it would be. And just finally, I'm going a bit slow at the moment. I'm saturated with sort of bizarre things that I've got to do that are really pummeling me, so to speak. But there's light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm hoping to get back into gear at some point. But it's not going to be for a few weeks yet, which is as frustrating as anything else. But yeah, light at the end of the tunnel for sure. So, and lots of things planned, like completing the print and play rules, and I mean, obviously we've got the bombardments. I mean, for anyone that's been, keeping abreast of developments, I am still developing the new server. I mean, I've got the new server, I've got it built, I've just got to actually change all the code, and I was going pretty good at that. And now these things have happened, and I've got to focus on sorting, the things that I've got to sort out. So that hasn't progressed at all, but that's a really big thing that's going to happen. As soon as I get the new server, I think things will be a lot better. I don't know why, because I don't have a problem with with how this works. It's always worked fine, but I just feel that the new server will be the portent of a little more success or development in overall, mainly because it's be a more reliable, more scalable platform that will allow me to sort of take the game further forward. At the moment it's on a shared server, and that has not so much problems, but it has potential problems. There's always a bit of a bugbear in the background, sort of thing, where I know it's on a shared server. It's basically a crappy server with like 500 other websites competing for resources. So I've got to, I'm building this for VPS, and I've actually built it. It's just I've got to transfer the code into PHP 7. And that's still sort of ongoing, etc. But I think once that's done, I won't have this sort of, I think it's a stigma, the stigma that I carry of having this sort of shared reseller service that this is actually hosted on, even though I'm actually quite happy with it. I'm happy with it. I just always constantly seem to think that, there's this sort of shadow saying, you need to do this, and I don't really want to do it because, as I say, it's fine. I don't really have problems. Sometimes it goes down, but so does anything. I mean, if I was to show you my Facebook page, it takes like 5 minutes to load, and that's just loading. Every time I want to look at it, I've actually got to sort of come back and refresh it and come back a couple of minutes later and see what's happening. And if Facebook could do that, well, I don't know. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. I hope you enjoyed that. As I said, it's going to be a bit quiet for another couple of weeks maybe, but should get back up to speed soon. There's so many things that I want to do. I'm just sitting here looking at all the books I got, and each one of them is just a goldmine of possibility. So there's so much to be done. It's quite surreal. I've also been doing a lot on the Abakan War, whatever it's called, and I think I've got a few issues there, but that's another one that I really want to sort of try and polish up. Complete the Ogaden War, also working through the Afghan War, etc. So stay tuned, and I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.